Cartels aren't just drug dealers. They're global empires, armed militias, and shadow governments rolled into one. From billion-dollar cocaine routes to child assassins and prison escape tunnels, the truth behind these organizations is darker and more organized than most people realize. Today, we're diving into the full cartel iceberg, starting with what you think you know and going all the way down to real-world horrors most people never even want to hear about. Follow my Instagram, join my Discord, and most importantly, subscribe for more videos because look at this chart. This is fucked up, guys. We can do better. Starting with El Chapo's prison escape. In 2015, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the leader of the Sinaloa cartel, pulled off one of the most insane prison escapes in modern history. He was locked up in Altiplano, a maximum security prison in Mexico that was supposedly escape-proof. But after just 17 months inside, he vanished. Security footage showed him ducking into the shower area of his cell, which conveniently had a blind spot, then nothing. Guards found a hole under the shower that led to a literal underground tunnel over a mile long, complete with lightning, oxygen, and even a motorcycle on rails to transport him. The tunnel led to a construction site outside the prison. A team had spent months digging it from a safe house. This wasn't just a last-minute breakout, it was a high-level cartel-financed engineering project. The escape humiliated the Mexican government and made headlines worldwide. El Chapo was recaptured in 2016, but the escape cemented his status as a narco legend. Sinaloa Cartel. The Sinaloa Cartel is the most powerful and internationally connected drug cartel in the world. It was co-founded by several key figures in the 1980s, including Miguel Angel Felix Garado, and later led by El Chapo. What made Sinaloa stand out wasn't just brutality, it was business. They were pioneers in using airplanes, submarines, and tunnels to move drugs efficiently. They also diversified. Cocaine, heroin, meth, marijuana, and now fentanyl. Sinaloa has deep roots in local communities, bribing officials and paying off entire police departments. Unlike some rival groups, Sinaloa operates more like a global corporation, running logistics, laundering money, and keeping a sleek PR image in some areas. Even after El Chapo's arrest, the cartel split into factions, with his sons, Los Chapitos, continuing the fentanyl trade, while Ismael El Mayo Zambada maintains control behind the scenes. The US government has called Sinaloa the most enduring and sophisticated criminal enterprise in North America. CJNG. CJNG, or the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, is currently Sinaloa's biggest rival, and way more aggressive. They rose to power in the 2010s after splitting off from the Sinaloa Cartel and quickly built a reputation for sheer brutality. These guys don't hide in the shadows, they post intimidation videos online showing their military-style convoys, full body armor, and gold-plated weapons. They've declared open war on the government, ambushed elite military units, and even shot down a Mexican army helicopter in 2015 with a rocket launcher. Their leader, El Mencho, is one of the most wanted men in the world, with a $10 million reward from the DEA. CJNG has made massive moves in meth and fentanyl production and taken over strategic regions like Michoacan, Guanajuato, and even parts of the US. Pablo Escobar. Even if you've never watched Narcos, you've probably heard the name. Pablo Escobar was the head of the Medellin cartel in Colombia and at one point supplied 80% of the world's cocaine. He was worth billions, had his own private zoo, and offered to pay off Colombia's national debt just to avoid extradition to the US. But Escobar wasn't just a drug trafficker, he was a populist, a terrorist, and basically ran a parallel government. He built housing for the poor and bought loyalty in Medellin, but also blew up airplanes, assassinated presidential candidates, and waged war against the Colombian state. In 1991, he cut a deal to avoid extradition by building his own prison, La Catedral, which included a bar, a jacuzzi, and a disco. He eventually escaped, went on the run, and was killed in a rooftop shootout in 1993. Escobar's death marked the fall of Medellin, but his legacy shaped the global drug war forever. Cocaine trafficking routes. Cocaine moves like a global supply chain, and for decades, the core route has been Colombia to Central America to Mexico to the US. Most of the world's cocaine is still produced in the Andes, which is like Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia, then trafficked north via planes, boats, and jungle trails. The drugs move through narco-controlled zones in Honduras and Guatemala before hitting Mexican smuggling corridors. Once it's in Mexico, cartels like Sinaloa or CJNG handle distribution into the US via tunnels, hidden compartments, and semi-trucks, border mules, or drone drops. On the flip side, cash and guns flow south. Europe is also a major market, and traffickers now use West Africa as a staging point to get coke into Spain and the Netherlands. These routes constantly evolve due to busts, arrests, and political changes, but the core idea remains. Move fast, use bribes, and never take the same road twice. Narco corridos. Narco corridos are basically cartel folk music. Think like country ballads mixed with violent rap lyrics, often praising real-life cartel bosses. Originating from northern Mexico, these songs romanticize the lives of smugglers, assassins, and drug lords. They're usually played with accordions and tubas like traditional norteño music, but the lyrics are pure flex. You'll hear verses about AK-47s, police shootouts, gold-plated cars, and jail time. Some of the most infamous narco corrido singers have been killed for either disrespecting a rival group or revealing too much. For example, Valentin Elizalde was murdered after performing a song that supposedly dissed the Zetas. Even though the Mexican government has tried to ban them from radio and concerts, these songs are still wildly popular. Not just in Mexico, but in parts of the US with heavy cartel influence. And speaking of which, the next entry is Los Zetas. Los Zetas started as the armed wing of the Gulf Cartel, made up of elite Mexican soldiers who defected from GAFE, which is one of the country's most feared military groups. They were trained in advanced tactics, including urban combat, ambushes, and psychological warfare, and brought all that skill into the drug world. In the early 2000s, they broke off and became their own cartel, building an empire through extreme violence and control of migrant routes, fuel theft, and extortion. They made a name for themselves with mass beheadings, burning buses of people alive, and filming their executions with night vision gear like it was a military op. At their peak, Los Zetas controlled major regions in northeastern Mexico and smuggled drugs, people, and oil. Over time, internal wars and government crackdowns weakened them, but splinter groups like the Northeast Cartel still carry the Zetas' legacy of violence. DEA Most Wanted List. The DEA's Most Wanted Fugitives list is basically a leaderboard of the most dangerous, high-level drug traffickers operating internationally. It's packed with top cartel figures, many of whom have multi-million-dollar bounties. El Chapo was on this list for years before his capture, and his sons are all listed as Los Chapitos. Another big name is El Mencho, which we already talked about earlier, who is the leader of CJNG. And again, he has a $10 million reward on his head, higher than many terrorist leaders. The list also includes chemists, financial operators, and corrupt businessmen tied to laundering cartel profits. Most of the people on this list operate out of Mexico, but others are tied to Colombia, Venezuela, or even China, especially with fentanyl precursors. The DEA uses this list to coordinate international arrests and apply pressure, but in some cases, these fugitives remain at large for decades, protected by armed groups and corrupted officials. And that was Layer 1. That was pretty awesome, but let's get into ones like some more things that are a little bit less well known, a little bit more curious, and some shit that I didn't even know about whenever I started researching this video. So, the first entry is Cartel versus Mafia. What's the difference? People love to compare Mexican cartels to the Italian mafia, but the differences run deep. The mafia traditionally operated under a strict hierarchy: bosses, underbosses, capos, soldiers, all governed by omerta, a code of silence. They kept things low-key, controlled specific territories, and focused on rackets like gambling, extortion, and unions. Cartels, on the other hand, are more militarized, decentralized, and ruthlessly public. They are not afraid of open warfare. They'll post executions online, blow up convoys, and fight entire government forces with armored vehicles. Cartels also control entire regions, sometimes governing them with local police and mayors under their thumb. While mafia groups laundered money through nightclubs and construction companies, cartels own entire avocado industries, gas stations, even pop record labels. They also operate more like franchises. One group can control drug production, another handles smuggling, and another enforces discipline. So while both are organized crime, cartels act more like warlords with supply chains, and the mafia is more like a business club with guns. Now, if this video does well, I want to do a Mafia Iceberg as well. I think that would be so interesting. So let me know if you want that in the comments. Narco submarines. Narco submarines are one of the wildest but very real cartel inventions. These are homemade semi-submersible vehicles used to transport drugs, especially coke, across oceans while staying undetected by radar. Most are built deep in the jungles of Colombia, often with fiberglass and off-the-books motors, costing up to $2 million each. They're nearly invisible to sonar and sit just low enough in the water to avoid detection, often with only a small exhaust pipe visible. Each one can carry 2 to 8 tons of coke in a single trip. Some are manned, others are unmanned ghost subs programmed to run an autopilot and sink after delivery. The US Coast Guard has intercepted dozens of these since the early 2000s. One famous bust in 2009 captured a sub carrying 7 tons of coke worth $200 million. Fast and Furious scandal. This one's not a movie, it's one of the US government's biggest screw-ups in the drug war. In 2009, the ATF, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, launched an operation called Fast and Furious where they allowed illegal guns to be purchased in the US and walked across the border into Mexico. The idea was to trace the weapons to high-level cartel members and finally make big arrests, but that didn't happen. The guns vanished into cartel hands and were used in countless murders, including the killing of US Border Patrol agent Brian Terry in 2010. Over 2,000 weapons were lost, and the operation became a political disaster, rightfully so. Some of those guns are still turning up years later at crime scenes in Mexico. Internal memos show that higher-ups in the DOJ knew about the plan, but let it happen. This is the kind of shit that our new president would do, bruh. For real. It's fucked up. Santa Muerte worship. Santa Muerte, or Saint Death, is a skeletal folk figure that some cartel members treat like a patron saint. She's not officially recognized by the Catholic Church, but her image, a cloaked skeleton holding a scythe, is everywhere in narco territory. Followers build shrines, light candles, and offer cigars, alcohol, or even blood in exchange for protection, power, or invisibility from law enforcement. Some hitmen pray to her before murders, believing she'll shield them from death or prison. And while many everyday Mexicans worship her for health or love, the narco version is darker, tied to fear, revenge, and spiritual dominance. Police have found Santa Muerte altars in stash houses and execution sites, sometimes with offerings made from human remains. La Barbie, or Edgar Valdez Villarreal. La Barbie is one of the most surreal figures in cartel history. Born in Laredo, Texas, Edgar Valdez Villarreal was a high school football player who earned the nickname La Barbie because of his light skin and blue eyes. He started smuggling marijuana across the border in the 90s, then moved up fast in the Beltran Leyva organization, becoming one of their top enforcers. Known for his extreme violence, La Barbie filmed his torture sessions to send messages to his enemies. He eventually became a major trafficker of cocaine into the US and even started his own cartel faction. What made him stand out was his American citizenship. He wasn't born into a cartel family, he chose this life and excelled at it. He was arrested in 2010 and extradited to the US in 2015, where he's currently serving a 49-year sentence. His case blew apart the idea that cartels were just local. The Gulf Cartel. The Gulf Cartel is one of Mexico's oldest and most influential drug trafficking groups. It rose to power in the 1970s and 80s by working with Colombian cartels to move cocaine through the Gulf of Mexico into Texas. By the early 2000s, they were running huge smuggling operations and had their own military wing, Los Zetas, who later split off. The Gulf Cartel operated like a corporation, controlling territories, paying off law enforcement, investing in legitimate businesses. But internal betrayals, rivalries, and the rise of new enemies like CJNG fractured their control. In cities like Reynosa and Matamoros, they still wield significant power, but the organization is now split into warring factions like Los Metros and Los Ciclones, constantly battling for control. Despite the chaos, the Gulf Cartel remains pretty deeply embedded in the struggling economy. especially for migrants, weapons, and methamphetamine. Narco tunnels at the border. You've probably heard of drug tunnels before, but the scale of them is wild. These aren't just crawl spaces, many are fully engineered with ventilation systems, electricity, and rail tracks to move packages. The US and military authorities have discovered over 150 tunnels since the early 1990s, with some stretching over 2,000 feet under the US-Mexico border. The most advanced ones link warehouses on each side so traffickers can move literal tons of cocaine or meth with no risk of being spotted at the actual border. In 2020, authorities found the largest known tunnel near Tijuana. It was over 4,300 feet long, 5.5 feet tall, and included drainage and reinforced walls. These tunnels aren't cheap. They cost millions to build, but they're a crucial investment for cartels when traditional smuggling lanes are hot. Some even include escape hatches in case of busts, making them feel more like underground war infrastructure than criminal shortcuts. Operation Black Swan. And no, this does not include Natalie Portman, sadly. Operation Black Swan was the dramatic end to El Chapo's second escape saga. After fleeing through that infamous tunnel in 2015, he went on the run again, dodging Mexican forces for months. But by early 2016, authorities tracked him to Los Mochis, a city in Sinaloa. Mexican Navy Special Forces, the Marines, launched a raid on the house at 4:30 a.m. A fierce shootout broke out with 5 of Chapo's bodyguards killed and 1 Marine injured. Chapo tried to escape through a hidden tunnel again, but this one led to a sewer system, and he was eventually caught trying to flee in a stolen car. What made this moment iconic was the public release of the raid footage, showing helmet cam shots of Marines clearing rooms, exchanging fire, and storming Chapo's hideout like it was Call of Duty. After his arrest, he was quickly extradited to the US, where he's now serving life at ADX Florence, the most secure prison in the country. Alright guys, and that was Layer 2. Who's excited for Layer 3 of this awesome iceberg? I know I am. Go ahead and leave a like if you're excited for Layer 3 of this awesome iceberg. Also, I'm still accepting goth girl applications, so hit me up. See, that was an inside joke from last video. Michoacan Vigilante Uprising is the first entry of this new lair. In 2013, regular citizens in the Mexican state of Michoacan decided that they'd had enough. The Knights Templar Cartel, a cult-like splinter group from La Familia Michoacana, was terrorizing communities. They weren't just trafficking drugs, they were extorting every business in sight, kidnapping children, murdering entire families, and even charging protection tax on tortillas. The federal government wasn't stopping it, so civilians, farmers, teachers, mechanics, formed autodefensas, or self-defense groups. They armed themselves with hunting rifles, machetes, even homemade weapons, and started taking back towns by force. What made this historic was the sheer scale. It wasn't just a few guys with pickup trucks. It was hundreds of people creating roadblocks, raiding cartel homes, and restoring order where the police had failed. The government eventually stepped in to legalize the groups and absorb them into rural defense forces, but many vigilante leaders were later accused of forming their own cartels. Still, for a brief moment, it was everyday people fighting back against a narco state, so. Cartel massacre. On May 13, 2012, Mexican authorities discovered 49 dismembered human bodies scattered along a highway near Cartel, Nuevo Leon. No heads, no hands, no feet. The scene looked like a literal slaughterhouse dump. Initially, no group took credit, but it was soon tied to the brutal war between Los Zetas and the Gulf Cartel, who were in an all-out turf war over northeastern Mexico. The point wasn't just to kill enemies, it was to send a message. Leaving the bodies like that, unidentifiable in public, was designed to cause fear not just in rival groups, but in entire cities. People were scared to travel, scared to talk, scared to live. It was one of the most gruesome public atrocities in modern cartel history. And the fact that authorities couldn't even ID most of the victims made it worse. The massacre symbolized how cartels had completely lost any pretense of business and embraced psychological warfare as a primary weapon. CJNG armored convoys. CJNG doesn't just move in convoys, They move in military-grade narco tanks. Nicknamed monstruos, or monsters, these vehicles are custom-built with bulletproof steel, gun turrets, battering rams, and armored plating that can withstand rifle fire. They look like something out of Mad Max. Videos have surfaced and been confirmed by authorities showing entire CJNG convoys rolling through rural towns in formation, blasting music, waving cartel flags, and carrying 50 cal machine guns. Some of these armored trucks even have shooting ports for interior passengers to fire from, or cages for prisoners. It's not just for show either, they've been used in actual firefights against the Mexican military and rival cartels. In July 2020, a video of a convoy near Jalisco went viral, showing over 20 armored vehicles in a single parade. Narco execution videos. Cartel execution videos are real, and they're intentionally made to be found. These clips, often filmed in HD with multiple camera angles, are uploaded to Telegram, WhatsApp chains, private forums, and even sometimes Twitter before being scrubbed. They show beheadings, dismemberments, torture, burnings, and shootings at point-blank range. Sometimes victims are forced to confess or name rivals on camera before being murdered. Other times, they're rival cartel members, police officers, or people accused of snitching. What makes these videos particularly disturbing is how calculated they are. They're not random, they're terror campaigns designed to psychologically destroy enemies and terrify the public. In some cases, entire towns empty out after a brutal video. These recordings are usually branded with watermarks or logos like CJNG's skull emblem or Los Zetas call sign. Like, I remember my first one that I saw was the Funky Town video. I'm sure a lot of y'all have seen that. That video is fucked up. Like, oh my god damn, that video is bad. El Pozolero, or the Stew Maker. Santiago Mesa Lopez, known as El Pozolero, worked for the Tijuana cartel in the early 2000s, but he wasn't a hitman. His job was to dissolve bodies in acid. The nickname comes from pozole, a Mexican stew made with hominy and pork, because what he did looked horrifyingly similar. When he was arrested in 2009, he admitted to dissolving at least 300 bodies, though some estimates go as high as 650. Victims were often brought to remote safe houses where Mesa had 55-gallon drums filled with caustic soda, or sodium hydroxide. He'd dump in the bodies, stir, and leave them until they liquefied. Police found remnants of bone and hair at the sites, but most of the victims were never identified. El Pozolero said he never killed anyone, he just cleaned up. It's crazy. Mass graves in Tamaulipas. The state of Tamaulipas has seen some of the worst mass killings in Mexico's cartel war. In 2010 and 2011, authorities uncovered dozens of mass graves, many tied to Los Zetas, who were notorious for kidnapping entire groups of civilians. In one case, they stopped multiple buses full of migrants and passengers heading north, and executed them all when they refused to work as drug mules or killers. In the town of San Fernando, over 190 bodies were found buried in shallow pits across ranches and empty lots. Many had been beaten to death with blunt objects to save bullets. These weren't just rival cartel members, they were teachers, farmers, bus drivers, and kids. Some towns became literal death zones. The discovery of these graves showed how the war, it really wasn't just between cartels, it was on the people themselves. Enforced disappearances. One of the most chilling parts of the cartel war isn't what's found, it's what's never seen again. As of 2024, over 110,000 people in Mexico are officially missing. The term enforced disappearance means someone was taken against their will, usually by a cartel, sometimes by corrupt police, and never seen again. These victims vanish without a trace, no ransom, no video, no body. Sometimes it's retaliation, sometimes mistaken identity, and other times it's to silence witnesses or punish families. Entire regions are filled with unmarked graves, and families organize search groups armed with sticks and shovels because the government won't help. Cartels often threaten victims' families into staying quiet, and the lack of trust in local police makes reporting disappearances dangerous. It's so sad. Alright, that was Layer 3, let's get into Layer 4, starting with Mexican politicians tied to cartels. It's not just street cops getting paid off. At nearly every level of Mexico's government, politicians have been caught, exposed or assassinated over cartel ties. Former governors like Tomás Yarrington and Javier Duarte were arrested for laundering cartel money, protecting shipments, and even aiding in kidnappings. Duarte stole billions from public funds and allegedly helped Los Zetas operate freely in his state. Yarrington, now serving time in the US, was convicted of accepting bribes from both the Gulf Cartel and Los Zetas while in office. Former public security chiefs have been indicted for leaking intel. Mayors are frequently threatened or bought off, and dozens have been murdered for resisting cartel influence or switching sides. The overlap is so severe that the Mexican government created entire security units that exclude local police out of fear that they're compromised. CIA and DEA narco deals. Yes, the US government has a documented history of tolerating, facilitating, or outright protecting drug traffickers during covert operations. The clearest example is the Iran-Contra scandal in the 1980s. The CIA helped arm the Contra rebels in Nicaragua by organizing secret arms deals with Iran. To fund these weapons purchases and bypass US law, the Contras trafficked cocaine into the US, often with CIA awareness. Investigative journalist Gary Webb broke this story in the Dark Alliance series, showing how this cocaine helped fuel the crack epidemic in Los Angeles. His claims were later corroborated in part by a 1998 CIA Inspector General report, which admitted the CIA knew about the Contra drug activity and did little to stop it. Meanwhile, drug lords like El Negro Durazo and Manuel Noriega, Panama's leader, had protection due to their intelligence value. The DEA also ran operations like Project Cassandra, where enforcement on Hezbollah-linked traffickers was deprioritized to protect political deals. Cocaine trafficking through Africa. Cocaine doesn't just move north into the US, it moves east through Africa and ends up in Europe. Since the early 2000s, West African countries like Guinea-Bissau, Sierra Leone, and Ghana have become major waypoints for Latin American cartels shipping cocaine to Europe. Guinea-Bissau is often called Africa's first narco state. Its military leaders were caught allowing cartels to land planes full of cocaine on protected airstrips. In 2013, the DEA even captured Guinea-Bissau's Navy chief, Admiral Jose Americo Bubo na Chuto, in a sting where he agreed to store and move cartel coke. These countries are attractive because of weak law enforcement, corruption, and direct flight connections to Europe. The final destination is often Spain, Portugal, or the Netherlands, where cartels partner with Albanian, Moroccan, or Dutch gangs to distribute the product. This Africa-Europe pipeline is so real that both Europol and UNODC have published multiple reports about it. Cartel activity in the Philippines. It sounds far-fetched, but Mexican cartels have actually made moves in Southeast Asia, especially the Philippines. In 2015, Philippine authorities seized shipments of methamphetamine linked to the Sinaloa cartel, including a raid on a massive meth lab north of Manila. Later in 2018, Filipino law enforcement confirmed that Sinaloa was actively trying to establish local partnerships to expand drug operations in the region. The cartels weren't doing day-to-day distribution, they were exporting the project and teaching local groups how to cook meth using precursors shipped from China. This came during the height of President Duterte's brutal drug war, which focused heavily on street-level users but often missed these international actors. The seizures and cartel presence were confirmed by Philippine Drug Enforcement Agency reports, and the US DEA flagged Southeast Asia as an emerging zone for Sinaloa's expansion. China-Mexico precursor trade. Most of the fentanyl epidemic in the US has one deadly root: Chinese chemical exporters. These companies, many operating legally or in a legal gray zone, sell precursor chemicals needed to manufacture fentanyl and synthetic opioids. They ship them to Mexican ports like Manzanillo, where cartels, especially CJNG and Sinaloa, process them into pills and powder in clandestine labs. Some Chinese companies even offered how-to guides on processing fentanyl and would label shipments with fake contents to avoid customs. US authorities, including the DEA and Homeland Security, have tracked these networks for years. In 2023, the US indicted dozens of Chinese nationals connected to fentanyl shipping rings, including ties to Mexico-based traffickers. Cartels handle the street-level distribution, but China is where the chemicals come from. Even when the Chinese government cracked down on certain substances, new unregulated analogs would pop up, creating a sort of whack-a-mole nightmare for enforcement. Beltran-Leyva's hits on US agents. In 2011, US Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, by the way, 2 middle fingers up for ICE right now in the country, by the way. Anyways, Jaime Zapata and Victor Avila were attacked on a highway in San Luis Potosi, Mexico, while driving in an armored vehicle. They were ambushed by members of the Los Zetas cartel who mistook them for rivals. Zapata was killed, and Avila was badly injured. Though Zetas were directly involved in the shooting, evidence later suggested that Beltran-Leyva's affiliates helped facilitate or gather intelligence in the area as part of a broader conflict with the US presence in northern Mexico. The incident shocked both governments, leading to joint investigations and a wave of arrests. One of the weapons used in the attack was later traced to Operation Fast and Furious, further deepening that scandal. The attack marked a turning point. Cartels were no longer avoiding confrontation with US agents, they were targeting them. And that was Layer 4, guys. Let's get into Layer 5 now. Who is excited? We're gonna start with children as sicarios. Yes, kids have been used as hitmen. One of the most infamous cases is Edgar Jimenez Lugo, better known as El Ponchis. He was arrested at age 14 in 2010 at the airport in Cuernavaca, trying to flee to San Diego. In interrogation videos, he openly confessed to beheading rivals, torturing people, and dumping bodies, all while working for the South Pacific Cartel, a splinter group of the Beltran-Leyva organization. He said he was drugged before killings and that he had started at age 11. Videos of him executing people were circulated online by the cartel, part of a psychological warfare strategy. And El Ponchis wasn't the only one. Mexican government reports and NGOs have documented hundreds of children recruited by cartels as lookouts, mules, or soldiers. Some are kidnapped, others are orphans with no options. Many are never arrested as adults, and if they are, they're placed in juvenile detention with little rehabilitation. It's child soldiering, just not in a war zone that people like to talk about. Women flayed or dismembered on camera. This is one of the most disturbing realities of cartel warfare. Women, particularly those accused of working with rival cartels or being informants, have been tortured, mutilated, and murdered on camera, with camera footage posted to cartel-run message boards, Telegram channels, or WhatsApp groups. The executions aren't just for punishment, they're for humiliation too. In some of the worst documented cases, women have been flayed alive, dismembered, or beheaded while still conscious. One widely circulated video from Tamaulipas in 2016 showed a woman forced to confess under torture, then mutilated by men from a cartel faction, likely CDG or Zetas, though identities were never confirmed. These videos are used to send messages, like this is what happens to traitors or lovers of the enemy. Even worse, some women are pregnant at the time of death, which cartels have used as a symbolic statement of erasing lineage. Mexican law enforcement is aware of these videos. They've been referenced in court cases and internal memos, but rarely shown to the public due to their extreme nature. US guns in cartel hands. And this one isn't speculation. Over 70% of firearms recovered from Mexican crime scenes and traced by the ATF come from the United States. These include AR-15s, AK-47 variants, Barrett 50 cals, and handguns. Many bought legally at US gun shops or gun shows with straw buyers, people who purchase firearms for someone else who can't legally buy one. Cartels take advantage of lax US gun laws in states like Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico, then smuggle them across the border, which I don't know, makes you kind of think about those states and whether they really should be as lax as they are. Once inside Mexico, these guns are used in executions, ambushes, and mass killings. Some guns have even been traced back to the failed Fast and Furious operation that we already talked about earlier, the one where the ATF allowed guns to cross the border in hopes of tracking them only for the weapons to turn up at massacre sites. Cartels are now better armed than many rural police departments, leading to shootouts where the military has to step in. The US government continues to acknowledge this connection, but political gridlock has made meaningful regulation nearly impossible. Cartel control of prisons. Mexican prisons in cartel-heavy states are often run by the inmates, not the guards. In places like Altamira, Apodaca, and Piedras Negras, cartel members have built literal mini-societies inside prison walls. Private suites, prostitutes, restaurants, TV access, cell phones, even alcohol and drugs. Meanwhile, rival inmates or unaffiliated prisoners are tortured, extorted, or murdered, often with guards looking the other way or actively participating. In the infamous Apodaca prison massacre of 2012, Zeta members murdered 44 Gulf Cartel inmates using weapons smuggled in by corrupt staff. Surveillance showed prison officials unlocking cells for the attackers. After the killing spree, many Zetas simply walked out the front door and escaped. These facilities are technically under government control, but in reality, cartels enforce their own hierarchy, collect rent, and continue running operations from the inside. Some even use prison as a safe house when the heat outside gets too high. This kind of reminds me of like in Goodfellas, like in the middle of Goodfellas when he's in prison, but he's just like living like hella nice. Any other Goodfellas fans out in the chat? Cartel front businesses. Cartels don't just move drugs, they launder the profits through legitimate industries, and some of those businesses are huge. The avocado industry in Michoacan, for example, is deeply infiltrated by cartels like CJ&G. They extort local farmers, take over shipments, and even export under their own brands. In 2020, the US briefly halted avocado imports from Mexico after a cartel issued death threats to American food inspectors. Cartels also use music labels to launder money through concert tours and album sales, especially with narco corrido artists. Other major fronts include nightclubs, real estate developments, construction companies, and fuel stations. In tourist cities like Cancun and Tulum, cartel-owned clubs and resorts operate openly, protected by payoffs to local law enforcement. Some cartels even run legal mining operations, selling iron or gold to foreign buyers while hiding drug profits in the export logs. These businesses are hard to crack because on paper they're fully compliant, but the violence and control behind them is hidden in plain sight. Organ harvesting rumors confirmed. This one sounds like urban legend, but there are documented cases where cartels have trafficked in human organs, especially in high conflict zones. While it's not widespread like in Hollywood horror movies, there are confirmed incidents where victims' organs were removed post-mortem in suspicious circumstances. In 2014, Mexican federal police in Guerrero found multiple corpses missing internal organs, and forensic reports showed clean surgical cuts, not the type of damage typical of trauma or dismemberment. Some cases involved migrants or kidnapped individuals whose bodies were dumped near cartel hotspots. In 2011, authorities in Hidalgo uncovered a cartel safe house containing medical equipment, blood bags, and refrigeration units. While some of it was used for torture, officials didn't rule out black market organ trafficking, especially kidneys. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, or UNODC, and Interpol have acknowledged that organ trafficking has been linked to organized crime in Latin America, including Mexico. Again, it's rare, but it's real. Los Zetas founding by GAFE members. Los Zetas began as the armed enforcement wing of the Gulf Cartel, and their roots are fully military. In the late 1990s, the Gulf Cartel recruited about 34 elite soldiers from GAFE, or Grupo Aeromóvil de Fuerzas Especiales, Mexico's special forces unit trained in counterinsurgery, interrogation, and urban warfare. And these weren't just average grunts. Many had been trained by the US at Fort Bragg and the Israeli Defense Forces, with instruction in psychological warfare, torture resistance, and jungle operations. The first Zetas acted as bodyguards and assassins for Gulf leaders, but they quickly gained power, expanded recruitment, and broke away to form their own cartel by 2010. Unlike older groups focused on smuggling, the Zetas were all about domination by terror. Mass killings, public displays of torture, executions filmed with military precision. Their tactics changed cartel warfare, and many of today's brutal techniques, like hanging bodies from bridges or dismemberment videos, came from their training background, which is crazy. Alright guys, that was layer 5, let's get into layer 6, the scariest one yet. We're gonna start with the narco-satanists of Matamoros. In 1989, wait, is that a Taylor Swift reference? Mexican police discovered a cult operating out of a ranch in Matamoros that blended drug trafficking with ritualistic human sacrifice. The leader was Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo, a Cuban-American who practiced Palo Mayombe, a religion derived from African spiritualism, but he twisted it into a death cult. Constanzo and his followers, including cartel-linked traffickers, believed human sacrifice would grant them protection from police and supernatural power over rivals. They called their ritual space the Nganga, a cauldron filled with animal parts, blood, and eventually human bones. Victims were tortured, dismembered, and decapitated, some while alive, and body parts were added to the Nganga as offerings. The cult operated with impunity until they kidnapped an American student, Mark Kilroy, while he was on spring break. That brought massive media attention and pressure, leading to a police raid. Constanzo died in a shootout, but the case revealed how cartels weren't just criminal, they could become spiritual death cults. Execution of DEA agent Enrique Kiki Camarena. In 1985, Kiki Camarena, a DEA agent working undercover, was kidnapped, tortured, and killed after uncovering a massive marijuana plantation tied to the Guadalajara cartel. His death sparked international outrage and nearly derailed US-Mexico relations. Camarena was beaten, electrocuted, had his skull crushed, and was tortured for over 30 hours. All of it was recorded on audio, later recovered by investigators. The recordings were real, and the tapes captured his screams and forced interrogation. The US launched Operation Leyenda, the largest DEA investigation in history, leading to arrests of several cartel leaders, including Rafael Caro Quintero. But what makes this case bottom-tier iceberg material is the alleged CIA involvement. Many credible sources, including ex-DEA agents and journalists like Charles Bowden, have claimed that the CIA was working with cartels during Iran-Contra and turned a blind eye to drug smuggling in exchange for intelligence. Some believe Kiki discovered too much and was eliminated not just by traffickers, but with covert US knowledge. This theory, while unproven, is supported by multiple whistleblowers and internal memos. Narco terror in Veracruz. In 2011, Veracruz became the backdrop for one of the most blatant acts of cartel terrorism in Mexico's modern history. Over 35 bodies were dumped during rush hour traffic, thrown off bridges, or abandoned in piles in public spaces. All of the victims had signs labeling them as members of Los Zetas, but many turned out to be civilians with no known ties to organized crime. The group responsible was likely CJ&G, who used the stunt as a public message saying, "We're cleaning the streets." The killings weren't just executions, they were propaganda designed to shift blame, stoke panic, and show dominance. Veracruz officials were caught off guard, and media outlets were threatened into underreporting or framing it as cartel v cartel. What made it worse was the deliberate falsification of names and affiliations. It wasn't just about killing enemies, it was about killing anyone and labeling them expendable. Mass beheadings in Acapulco. Between 2006 and 2010, Acapulco, once a global tourist destination, turned into one of the most violent cities on earth. During this period, cartel wars between Beltran Leyva, Sinaloa, and independent factions led to weekly beheadings. Heads were left in coolers, dumped in ice chests, or placed on spikes outside police stations. In one 2006 incident, 5 decapitated heads were left on a disco dance floor with a note saying this will happen to all traitors. The violence escalated after the death of Arturo Beltran Leyva, triggering internal power struggles. Tourists were still arriving, but bodies were being left in public spaces, hung from bridges, and filmed in gruesome videos. Local police were overwhelmed, underpaid, or collaborating with one faction or another. This wasn't a one-time massacre, it was sustained terror visible to every local and every tourist. Cocaine in human corpses. It sounds like horror fiction, but Colombian drug traffickers have used actual human bodies as smuggling containers. In confirmed cases, they have surgically implanted bricks of cocaine inside cadavers, usually corpses of drug mules or unidentified victims, to avoid detection by airport scanners and customs dogs. In 2010, Spanish customs seized a container shipped from Colombia containing a corpse in a sealed coffin with over 5 kilograms of cocaine inside the abdominal cavity. The body had been embalmed and sealed like a standard funeral export. In other cases, funeral homes were used as fronts where bodies were temporarily stored, stuffed, and exported. While this method isn't common due to the difficulty and risk, Interpol, the DEA, and Colombian police have confirmed several incidents. As part of a larger pattern, cartels will use anything, even human flesh, to move product. Internal cartel executions. Cartels don't just kill rivals, they brutally execute their own people for failure, betrayal, or financial mistakes. Losing a load, being late on payments, or simply being suspected of leaking info can lead to torture, execution, and family-wide extermination. Videos exist showing cartel operatives interrogating, mutilating, and killing their own men, often on suspicion of theft or incompetence. Some are made to dig their own graves before being buried alive. Others are burned alive, hung, or torn apart. In CJNG, for example, members are sometimes killed for disobeying protocol, and the killings are recorded to warn others. There are documented cases where entire families of fallen or suspected traitors were wiped out, spouses, kids, cousins, to erase any potential threat or emotional motive for revenge. Cartels rule through paranoia, and royalty is enforced not by money, but by terror and total control. Migrant massacres. In August 2010, 72 migrants from Central and South America were kidnapped near San Fernando by Los Zetas. These migrants, including men, women, and children, were headed to the US, but the Zetas intercepted their convoy and gave them a choice: work for the cartel or die. When they refused, all 72 were lined up and executed with shots to the head or the chest. One man survived, shot in the neck, and escaped to alert authorities. The military discovered the mass gravesite, and the incident grew international outrage. But it wasn't an isolated case. In 2011, authorities found another 193 bodies buried in mass graves around the same town, mostly migrants who had either resisted recruitment or were kidnapped for ransom and never paid for. These weren't enemies, these were innocents, slaughtered for being in the wrong place during cartel recruitment dives. Fuck. DEA informants tortured on film. This is one of the darkest confirmed tactics cartel use. When they catch a DEA informant, or someone they believe to be one, they sometimes torture them on camera, and the footage gets passed through internal channels as a warning. One infamous example involved videos intercepted by Mexican authorities showing suspected informants being waterboarded, electrocuted, and mutilated, all while being forced to confess names. These videos are rarely leaked to the public, but intelligence agencies and narco defectors have confirmed their existence. The goal isn't just to punish the individual, it's like a scare tactic. US agents working undercover in Mexico often use cover identities and encrypted phones, because once a mole is exposed, they're dead within hours, and in the worst cases, turned into a propaganda trophy. Video of El Comandante Diablo burning people alive. This video is 100% real, and its existence is one of the most horrifying pieces of cartel propaganda ever released. In the early 2010s, a video circulated on narco forums and Telegram channels showing a man, only known as El Comandante Diablo, burning a group of bound prisoners alive. The victims are doused in gasoline and set on fire, still conscious, screaming as the camera zooms in. The execution was believed to be carried out by a CJNG splinter faction or Zetas Nueva Sangre, though exact affiliations were never confirmed. This video was not intended for news, it was meant to terrorize and entire towns to show what happens to informants, rivals, or anyone challenging cartel rule. Authorities confirmed the video's authenticity and matched it to burned bodies found later in Veracruz. And that was the Cartel Iceberg, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like and comment if you did, and thank you for watching to the very end. Everybody have a great night, and I'm sorry if anything I talked about gives you nightmares. It is all so fucked up. But anyway, sweet dreams.